We're live.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our fellowship training seminar series for ICHRRF. And I would be sharing my screen with you guys. So let's see. Are you able to see my screen?
We're seeing a desktop, but not a PowerPoint.
Okay. Let me do it again. Let me unshare and start sharing again. Okay. Can see now my screen? Hello. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay. So on behalf of the International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom, I invite you to another series of weekly fellowship training program in human rights and religious freedom. We do weekly seminars as part of Professor Nanda Fellowship Training Program. And the faculty for this program are Professor Nanda, Professor Yashwant Pathak, Professor Nalini Rao, Professor Lavanya Vamsani, Dr. Shekhar Patel, myself, Mr. Carl Clemens, our Executive Director, and Mr. Hardam Tripathi, Esquire, who is our Legal Director. Currently in the fellowship training program, there are two fellows, Mr. Ankit Shah and Mr. Ripudaman Pachori. Today's topic for fellowship training seminar will be discussed in a standard format. First, the fellow will give a presentation for 25 minutes. Then there will be 10 minutes commentary by our chief mentor, Professor Nanda, in whose honor we have started this fellowship training program. This will be followed by another 25 minutes discussion by the faculty preceptor, and last 30 minutes is for question and answers by anyone from the audience. So the topic for today's seminar is women's rights and sexual atrocities. And of course, the fellow who is going to make the initial presentation is Mr. Ripudaman Pachori, and our faculty preceptor for today is Professor Nalini Rao. There are a couple of announcements for those who did not join the last week's fellowship training program. Professor Yashwant Pathak has been named Fellow of American Academy of Advancement of Science. This is a great honor not only on Professor Pathak, but indirectly we take this as honor on ICHRRF as well, because Professor Pathak is one of the leading lights. I would be requesting the fellows to continue to work on their research proposals, and we are calling for a new batch of applicants for July 22 batch of fellowship programs. So a few of the housekeeping rules: kindly mute yourself to avoid noise interference, because if everyone is unmuted, there's a lot of noise interference. Please change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. Please do not try to interrupt our esteemed speaker. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to ask questions during the question and answer session. So people who join anonymously will not be allowed to ask questions. Please be precise and specific in asking a question. Please send your questions by the chat function. Don't send long comments in the form of a monologue. And lastly, most of our seminars are recorded and they are available for viewing later on. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now, and I will invite our fellow Ripudaman Pachori to go ahead and make his presentation. Ripudaman, please.
Thank you, Adityanjee. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to present on this topic. I'll start with the comment that women rights are actually the human rights. So women rights are the rights and entitlements claimed for women and girls worldwide. They form the basis for the women's rights movement in 19th century and the feminist movements during 20th and 21st centuries. In some countries, these rights are institutionalized or supported by law, local customs, and behaviors, whereas in other, they are ignored and suppressed. They differ from broader nations of human rights through claims of an inherent historical and traditional bias against the exercise of rights by women and girls in favor of men and boys. Issue commonly associated with notions of women's rights include the right to bodily integrity and autonomy, to be free from sexual violence, to vote, to hold public offices, to enter into legal contracts, to have equal rights in family law, to work, to fair wages or equal pays, to have reproductive rights, to own property, and to education. I'll give you some ancient historical perspective, how the rights of women were given or compromised in different countries around the world. For example, in Mesopotamia, women in the ancient Sumer could buy or sell or inherit properties. They could engage in e-commerce and testify in the court as witnesses. Uh, Nevertheless, their husbands could divorce them on mild infractions, and a divorced husband could easily remarry another woman. In Egypt, in ancient Egypt, women enjoyed the same rights under the law as men. However, rightful entitlements depends upon social classes. Uh, Landed property descendants in the female line from mother to daughter and women were entitled to administer their own property. In India, during the Vedic times, uh, women enjoyed equal status with men in all aspects of life. Uh, Works by ancient Indian grammarians such as Patanjali and Katyayan suggested that women were educated in early Vedic period. Rig Vedic verses suggest that women married at a mature age and were probably free to select their own husbands in a practice called swayamvar, or live-in relationship called Gandharv Vivah or Gandharv marriage. Uh, in Greece, although women lacked political and equal rights in the city-states of ancient Greece, they enjoyed a certain freedom of movement until uh, archaic age. Records also exist of women in ancient Delphi, um, and some other states like Sparta area of Greece, owing about the owning of land, the most prestigious form of private property at that time. In China, women throughout historical and ancient China were considered inferior, though, and had subordinate legal status based on Confucius law. In imperial China, the three obediences promoted daughters to obey their fathers, wives to obey their husbands, and widows to obey their son. Women could not inherit businesses or wealth. Late imperial law also featured 7 different types of divorces. A wife could be apostate if she failed to birth a son, committed adultery, disobeyed her parents-in-law, spoke excessively, stole, or was given to bouts of jealousy, or suffered from an incurable or loathsome disease or disorder. The status of women in China was also low, largely due to the custom of foot binding. About 45% of the Chinese women had bound feet in 19th century. For the upper classes, it was almost 100%. Foot binding involved alteration of the bone structure so that the feet were only about 4 inches long. The bound feet caused difficulty of movement, thus greatly limiting the activities of women. During the Republic of China, 1912 to 49, and early Chinese government, women were legally bought and sold into slavery under the guise of domestic servants. These women were also known as Mui Tsai. The lives of Mui Tsai were recorded by American feminist Angie Samaldi in her book Portraits of Chinese Women in Revolution. During the Viking Age, women had a relatively free status in the Nordic countries of Sweden, Denmark, Norway, illustrated in the Icelandic Gragas and the Norwegian Prostatin laws and Gulating laws. The parental aunt, parental niece, and parental granddaughters referred to as Odalkvina all had the right to inherit the property from a deceased man. They were also part of the army and um, were um, basically were given the very responsible positions in the Viking army. After the age of 12, an unmarried woman, referred to as Mair or May, reached a legal majority, had the right to decide her place of residence, and was regarded as her own person before the law. An exception to her independence was the right to choose a marriage partner, as marriages were normally arranged by the clan. Widows enjoy the same independent status as unmarried women. Women had religious authority and were active as uh, priestess and oracles, within art as poets um, and rune master, and as merchants and medicine women. They may also have active within military offices. The stories about some of these women are unconfirmed, but some archaeological finds, such as Birka female Viking warrior, may indicate that at least some women were in military authority existed. Post-classical history, religious scriptures, Bible, both before and during biblical times, the role of women in the society were severely restricted. Nonetheless, in the Bible, women are depicted as having the right to represent themselves in court, the ability to make contracts, and right to purchase, own, sell, and inherit property. The Bible guarantees women the right to sex and their husbands. The Quran prescribes limited rights for the women in marriage, divorce, and inheritance by providing the wife, not her family, would receive a dowry from the husband which she could administer as her personal property. The Quran made women a legal party to the marriage contract. Um, Now I'll talk about the modern history. In Europe, in 16th and the 17th century, um, saw numerous witch trials which resulted in thousands of people across Europe being executed, of whom 75 to 95% were women, depending on time and place. The executions mostly took place in Germany, German-speaking lands, and during the 15th century, the terminology witchcraft was definitely viewed as something feminine as opposed to prior years. Famous witchcraft manuals such as uh, Malus Maleficarum depicted witches as diabolical conspirators who worshipped Satan and were primarily women. Culture and art at that time depicted these witches as seductive and evil. Throughout Europe, women's legal status centered around her marital status, while marriage itself was the biggest factor in restricting women's anatomy. Custom, statute, and practices not only reduces women's rights and freedom, but prevented single and widowed women from holding public offices on the justification that they might one day marry. In 18th and 19th century, we'll cover this kind of um, this kind of scenario later when we talk about the violence against women, and how um, in the public health system their rights were compromised. In 18th and 19th century in Europe, starting in the start of the 18th century and throughout the 19th century, the rights as a concept and claim gained increasingly political, social, and philosophical importance in Europe. Movements emerged which demanded freedom of religion, the abolition of slavery, rights of women, rights for those who did not own property, and universal suffrage. In United States, um, this information is from Times of Women's Legal Rights in United States. The women were giving the rights to vote. The Women Christian Temperature Union, Temperance Union was established in 1873 and championed women's rights, including advocating for prostitutes and for women's suffrage. In Central Asia, in Mongolia, marriage by abduction remains a serious problem. As of today, also, um, they do marriages like that. They sometimes they pretend they are abducting a woman, and sometimes they really abduct them. This practice of bride kidnapping is prevalent in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and other areas, adjoining other areas. We are all entitled of human rights. These includes the right to live free from violence and discrimination, to enjoy the highest attainable standards of physical and the mental health, to be educated, to own property, to vote, and to earn an equal wage. But across the globe, many women and girls still face discrimination on the basis of sex and gender. Gender inequality underpins many problems which disproportionately affect women and girls, such as domestic and sexual violence, lower pay, lack of access to education, and inadequate healthcare. For many years, women rights movements have fought hard to address this inequality, campaigning to change laws or taking to the streets to demand their rights are respected. A new movement have flourished in the digital age, such as Me Too campaign, which highlights the prevalence of gender-based violence and sexual harassments. Now, mostly these um, organizations who are advocating women rights, there are many agendas that they are fighting on. but the key agendas are the equal employment. Women are getting discriminated at the work front. Sometimes they do not get a job. If they get job, they are less paid than their male partners who are equal in education and experience. Some in many cases, nurses were, especially in Europe, it was preferred that the nurse should be an unmarried uh, person, an unmarried employee only. And after they get married, um, they were either um, the company or the hospital would change their status from permanent employee to temporary employee. So these kind of discriminations that in some fields they have faced. Right to vote. Many European countries did not have rights until a few decades ago. Um, and the latest, which is going on related to this, is going on in Afghanistan, where Taliban government do want to um, do want women to vote, but then they have their Sharia law that they have to wear burqa, and some women are conservative and they do not want their picture to be taken for the voting card. So there is a challenge. Some women organizations are advocating that these uh, these these type of restrictions by the government, like um, making of identity cards for the voting or for other purposes, should not be imposed on women, because that would restrict them to participate in the political structure. Then the property rights. This is all over the world. Women property rights have been compromised. UN has recognized only 6 countries in the world where women has got the rights equal to male, as far as the property is concerned, and other rights also. Um, Freedom of movement. Women were in some places were not allowed to drive even a car, or go alone outside the home. A male family member was required to accompany them if they want to go out. And the freedom of movement, I also gave you an example of foot bounding. They were forced to wear certain kind of footwear that would restrict their women. Um, in 17th century in France also, women were used as a party favor, and they were allowed to dress nicely, but had to tie back to the pole and remain on one place only while the party is going on, and the male members of in the party can enjoy um, the the meeting. Right to health, not just physical, but the mental and the social health. United Nations emphasize that when we talk about women health, we should also consider as a mental and the social health. Um, right to health will also be covered under a different topic, where forced pregnancy or um, basically health facilities are not provided to certain women based on their um, physical or social status or physical conditions. Right to education also is one of the major concern. Women have been compromised. Women uh, in the recent past, at least, were not given equal opportunities for the education. Um, one prospect and at higher educations also for the masters and the PhD programs. In some streams, male students were given preferences than women. Just to give you a perspective, um, um, and that the women are no inferior than the male partners. I would give you an example of the Nazi Second World War time when the Nazis persecuted these Jewish community members. And the people who basically planned the genocide of Jews was a team of 15 people, and out of that, 8 were PhD um, in their own different fields, like radiology or physics and other areas. Um, and unfortunately, those people didn't get education in human rights. Otherwise, they would not have done that thing. But the emphasis is on, first of all, um, rights um, to education for women. And secondly, also, there should be some forced education on the human rights in the education system to make um, people more humane. Then the reproductive rights, abortion and child marriages, forced pregnancy. In Pakistan, there have been allegations that underage girls belonging to minorities, especially Christian, Hindu, and Sikh community, are kidnapped and forcibly converted to Islam and forcibly married and subjected to rape. According to human rights organizations, hundreds of Hindu, Sikhs, and Christian girls are abducted and converted every year. The National Council for Churches in Pakistan, NCCP, said that the number of abduction of Christian girls are increasing every year. Alleged forced conversions of girls belonging to the Kailash community were also reported in media. Kailash community is an indigenous community of very few people in the mountainous, northern mountainous regions of Pakistan. Most of the targets are Hindu and Christian girls from lower caste and poor families. Such cases of forced conversions are being reported increasingly in the southern Sindh district of Thar, Umarkot, Mirpur Khas, and South Punjab, particularly in the Rahim Yar Khan district and adjacent areas. Some of these victims are allegedly as young as 12 years old. According to Pakistan 2017 Universal Periodic Review to the UN, Office of the United Nations High Commissioner of Human Rights (OHCHR), an average 20 of the Hindu girls are abducted every month in Pakistan, converted by force to Islam, and then married off to their abductors. Some international laws and declarations. Vienna Declaration and Program of Action. The Vienna Declaration and Program of Action, VDPA, is a human rights declaration adopted by consensus at the World Conferences of Human Rights on 25th June 1993 in Vienna, Austria. This declaration recognizes women's rights as being protected. Human rights, paragraph 18 reads, the human rights of women and of the girl child are an inalienable, integral, and indivisible part of universal human rights. The force and equal participation of women in political, civil, economic, social, and cultural life at the national, regional, and international level, and the eradication of all forms of discrimination on grounds of sex and priority objectives on the international community. United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on October 31st, 2000, the United Nations Security Council unanimously adopted United Nations Security Council's Resolution 1325, the first normal and legal, sorry, the first formal and legal document from the United Nations Security Council that requires all states to respect fully international humanitarian law and international human rights law applicable to the rights and protection of women, and girls during and after the armed conflicts.
Thank you, Ripudaman. We have exceeded your time, so we'll have to, stop here because we have other parts of the training seminar also. As I said that we have this new feature, we will have comments by our chief mentor, Professor Nanda now, who has been waiting. So Professor Nanda,
Sure.
we want to take benefit of your scholarship now. Please go ahead.
No, thank you. Nalini, welcome. Thank you for being with us. And Ripudamanji, wonderful work. And you have gone into history and gone into all these countries. And thank you for having done that research and presenting about the topic. Now, the topic today was given was women's rights and sexual atrocities. And that is the topic that goes beyond simply women's rights. But on women's rights, just a couple items for you that you probably have looked at. But do look at UN Women, and that site would give you a whole lot of work that is being done at the present time. Because what has happened, as you probably have read, that women's conferences took place and have taken place for many years. And finally, the Beijing conference, all these decades ago, talked about two things: women's empowerment and equality of genders, gender equality, women's empowerment. And that work has been going on. But today, as you look around on women's rights itself, that we are nowhere close to getting that goal achieved. In education today, we do have women taking a great deal of active part. But as you look at parliaments, you look at decision making, you look at the role of women in peacemaking apparatus, they are nowhere to be seen. And as you look at sexual atrocities, I think I would probably put the title as sexual violence, because atrocities simply mean that you have got a conflict going on, it's war, it's Yazidi women being mistreated, and in many wars, as you probably know, sexual violence is simply a tool in order to show their own supremacy, and that is where atrocities come in. But when you think about sexual violence, then at the present time, WHO, the health organization, has done a whole lot of work. And so kindly just look at it. What they have said is that 2018, they had done a huge survey, and they found out that 1/3 of women, 30% plus, throughout their life, at least in their life, one time or many times, they have had sexual violence. And then they have done a whole lot of work as to what can be done in order to prevent it, because most of it is preventable. And one thing that it came out was respect. And respect meant each letter had some basis to it in order to prevent it. R stood for relationship skills strengthening. E stood for empowerment of women. S was services ensured. Then P was poverty reduced. E was enabling environments. That means schools, that means workplaces, all that. C was about child and adolescent abuse prevented. And finally, T was transformed. And that is what in beliefs, in norms, you have to transformation of their attitudes. And when you think about sexual violence, it goes back to norms, it goes back to beliefs, it goes back to social attitudes, and it's preventable. And I think, later on, if you want that, and personally, Raw would probably help you, I can assist you in looking at female genital mutilation and other problems that are there at the present time. This year, in my human rights class, I had three Muslim women, and they did a work on, wrote papers on genital mutilation. And there, I think a very clear message was that in those countries where it's happening, that the relief, the prevention has to come from those countries. And that from the United States, from Europe, when people keep asking them to stop that FGM, it's not going to happen. So anyway, I think I'm going to want to listen to Professor Rao. So I'm going to stop here, but I want to thank you for taking the time to prepare and look at the history. But I think at the present time where we are on women's empowerment and gender equality, then I would simply suggest to you that today there is an effort made at the United Nations to look at sustainable development issues, and then they've got new goals, not simply millennium development, but sustainable development. And there are 17 goals. One of those goals is gender equality and women's empowerment. And if time permits you, please look at that. There is a whole lot of material on that, what has happened, what is happening today, and what's likely to happen tomorrow. And their thought is that by 2030, there should be much more progress, because from Beijing to today, there has been progress, but uneven. And so you might want to look at that and see where we are and where we are going. I have not touched upon what's happened in Bharat and what's ancient traditions of Bharat, and there is so much rich literature there, but I haven't touched it. Just simply touched upon where we are at the present time in the West and the efforts being made here. So I'm going to stop here, and I do have some time so that I can listen to Professor Rao before I leave.
Thank you, Professor
Thank you.
Nanda,
Thank
for
you.
your kind comments. Very, vast from various aspects of, human rights as women rights and UN conventions. Unfortunately, Professor Nalini Rao has not joined us. She was supposed to be the preceptor for today's presentation. I don't know what happened, but we do have Elder Elizabeth Arujo from Guatemala. And before opening for open discussion, we would like to receive some wisdom from Elder Elizabeth Arujo. She is also the high priestess in her own society. So she's there, and we would love to hear from her on this topic. Please, Elder Arujo.
Kindly unmute yourself.
Please unmute yourself. You are on the mute.
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. This is a little surprise for me. I just returned from El Salvador, and so I'm a little bit, I haven't landed yet. and But I think we have a lot of way to go still. In El Salvador, for example, we had a case of a woman who had an abortion, and it was, to her, it was an illegal abortion. She fell down and had an abortion, and then she went to jail. And things like this happens all the time. One of the things is that women are always punished for whatever, you know, in regards to sexual issues, but they never talk about the men. You know, they punish the girl, but they never punish the man. So I think we need to do a lot of work on educating men also. You know, and we have a big problem here with incest in the villages, especially with the pandemic. That people were, there's a lot of young girls, you know, having babies, lots of them, and the men are never punished. And then sometimes it's because the mothers of the girls don't, they try to protect the men because they are, they need, it comes to poverty, you know. They feel that if the man goes to jail, what are they going to do? And then it goes, that goes to back to education also, you know, where the girls don't go to school because they are trained more to be at home. And so it's a big problem still. Although there is hope because women are waking up, but we still have a long ways to go.
Very nice to hear from you, Elder Arujo. Before I open it for general discussion, since I, planned this seminar, I might make some comments because Professor Rao is not there. So somebody has to take that role. Ripudaman, you had an excellent presentation, starting from history, covering women's rights in all aspects of the world, and then coming to contemporary society. And of course, it's a vast subject, so I had to stop you because we want some time for discussion. And I know you had a lot of stuff prepared, so I thank you for that. Whenever it's an issue of rights, we have to do self-introspection. So we have to look what is closer to home. And living in United States, let's do a little bit of self-introspection about US society. So you talked about, women being burnt as witches. That was not just Europe. United States has the infamy of conducting the infamous or notorious Salem witch trials. And that did not happen in the deep south. It happened actually in North New England region, the famous Salem witch trials. And a lot of women were declared as witches, and they were executed or burnt or whatever. So the history of United States is really not good. Sexual slavery was rampant, and you had a president of United States who, quote unquote, used his African-American female slave for whatever purposes. And now we find out through DNA genealogy testing that whatever was done to a 14-year-old girl could today qualify for charges of statutory rape. So we have to do introspection into the society we are living in. Right to vote, universal suffrage did not come to United States, although it was declared a democracy in 1776. But right to universal suffrage, right of women to vote, came only in 1920s. And sometimes there's equality before the law, but having the equality before the law does not mean equal opportunity. So till this date, United States does not have a female president. And that tells you about the level of advancement of the society. So sometimes, each society or each nation makes pious claims, very lofty claims about their level of civilization and how uncouth and how uncivilized others are. But if the society does self-introspection, or if somebody in the great anthropological tradition does participant observer experiments, you look at the details of the society and you find what is going on. Professor Nanda
Right.
talked about.
I would like to add something to it,
Can
Adityanjee.
I? Yeah, I'll give you the chance, but
Okay.
let me go ahead. I'm taking the role of Professor Rao since she's not there. So Professor Nanda did talk about female genital mutilation. From ICHRRF's perspective, that's a very inhumane, condemnable practice that is to be abhorred and eliminated and exterminated altogether. We did publish or put a report by AHA Foundation on female genital mutilation on ICHRRF's website that gives state by state report, which states in United States have banned it. And you did mention that this is a practice in some of the Middle Eastern countries, but also in some of the African countries, very prevalent under the cloak of quote unquote culture or cloak or unquote religion. And sometimes there's a confusion. They cannot find out whether it is culture or religion or both. But the reality is that in this country, in 21st century, in state of Michigan, if you go to Dearborn and adjoining communities, there is practice of female genital mutilation. Cases have been brought, legal cases have been brought against licensed MDs. And these are not male MDs, these are female MDs who have been prosecuted for surreptitiously, illegally practicing female genital mutilation in illegal surgical clinics in cahoots with the family members of certain ethnicities. So there's a lot to do at home in United States as far as this is concerned. Professor Nanda did a very wise distinction between sexual violence and sexual atrocities. And there's a reason I put the word sexual atrocities, because sexual violence is pretty much prevalent in every society. What tends to happen that we use the expression sexual violence to normalize sexual atrocities by saying it is everywhere. And we then gloss over it. So we have sexual atrocities using women and atrocities, sexual violence against women as a war tool, not war crime, but as a war tool. So you find that, it is happening in Nigeria. Boko Haram, a non-state actor, abducted pre-pubertal girls, 300 of them from a school, and all of them were quote unquote married off. There is still not any case against the perpetrators. The same thing happened again in 21st century against Yazidi women who were subjected to sexual slavery, and it's an insult on the face of United Nations. It's an insult on the face of United Nations Human Rights Council that they were not able to prevent it. And that tells you the impotence of the existing UN organizations, impotence of the international code, that they are not able to, even till this day, bring it to task. So sometimes the notion that sexual violence is universal, everyone does it, so wink, wink, nod, nod, let this happen. And don't talk about because it is woke not to quote unquote talk about a specific community. I think the human rights organizations are complicit in these crimes against women that have happened under our own eyes. You know, when the genocide of Holocaust happened, we said never again. But what happened to Yazidi community? It is exactly the same thing. And in fact, in some ways, much worse. Holocaust did not involve female targeted violence. It was in general, whether you were man, woman, or child. There was a racial bias or racial thing over there. But what is happening in 21st century in Iraq, in Syria by ISIS against the Yazidi community was targeted not against a particular ethnicity, a particular religion, but also their women who were openly auctioned. And that is the most shameful, most heinous crime in 21st century. And whether it is United Nations, Security Council, Human Rights Council, they are all impotent. So we have to understand and we have to see that these things keep on happening. And just because we want to be woke, we don't want to point fingers, we let those things happen, we just wink at that and say sexual violence is part of all the societies. I do want to go to a little bit of history. So because I was born in India and raised in India, I do go by that experience. And in the history seminar, I did talk about, the history or the code of ethics. And code of ethics in India historically was Manusmriti. So there's a particular, chapter 3, verse 56 in Manusmriti, which says, Yatra naryastu pujayante ramante tatra devata, yatraitastu na pujayante sarvastra phala kriya. So basically, what does that mean? That means where women are honored, divinity blossoms there. Where women are honored, divinity blossoms there. And where they are dishonored, all actions become unfruitful. We are talking about thousands of years ago. We are talking about respect for women. This is nothing, 21st century UN conference, trying to make an acronym for respect for women. In some of the ancient societies did have respect for women. Ancient Vedic civilization did have respect for women, where women were at par with men, participated in creation of Vedas, the ancient texts. They were female sages called Rishikas before starting this seminar we were talking about. Lopamudra, Gargi, Gosha. So they are very famous Rishikas. And even as late as 9th century, in the famous debate between Mandan Mishra and Shankaracharya, wife of Mandan Mishra was the arbitrator of that debate. So that tells you how much honor was given to women in ancient societies, especially in ancient Indian society. So I used this time because Professor Rao was not there, and I just wanted to bring certain issues that had not been highlighted. But I'll give you a chance because you wanted to respond and you did not have enough time to complete your presentation, Ripudaman. Please go ahead.
So yeah, two things. One thing is you said we should look at ourselves first, and and you also talked about UN organizations and security councils are important. So I would say they are partner in crime. And one example is when during the Second World War, when the Allied forces moved to Germany, in Italy, they actually raped over 1 million women over there, girls and women. And this tool, women as a weapon of war, was also used to humiliate the opponent. It was also used as a bonding tool between the armies, fellow soldiers. So, if one soldier is committing a crime, another is committing crime, they are partner in crime. They would not highlight this issue because they both have done the similar thing. So, even though uh, these forces, allied forces, promise peace and social reforms and safety of the people or the country, people of the country they invaded. They did exactly opposite to what they went for. So that's the irony of the situation, and that's why, and at various platforms also, they would not highlight this particular issue. Similar to this was the issue of Rwanda, where Tutsi tribe, I think Houthis basically did to Tutsi tribe. They all killed mercilessly, and they raped and genital mutilation, and in some cases they poured acid and boiling waters to on women genitals. So, and the journals, army journals who ordered these kind of acts, they were trialed, but then they were let go because there was no proof of those um, sexual violences against women. So this is also one lack of proof it was always prevalent in these cases, and these cases were mostly dismissed. In Second World War uh, issue that I was discussing, there was no such proof. But there have been letters of the ministers and the priests of the local churches who during those days wrote their diaries and mentioned about the women who came to them for refuge, and they gave refuge. So some of this proofs are there in the personal diaries of some people of those time, but nothing has been used
Thank you,
against.
Ripataman, by highlighting this fact. And I think I applaud you for saying that they were partners in crime. And, again, looking at the history, we may have read a little bit about comfort women, how Japanese Imperial Army soldiers used the Korean women, during wartime. And there's a lot of, publicity about it. But reality is that victors write the history. And when victors write the history, they sanitize it and whitewash it. So the Imperial West did whitewash the history and did not talk about their crimes. And I guess young people like you, under supervision of our erudite scholars like Professor Nanda, will probably highlight this in 21st century in the form of a paper or in the form of a report, so that we do not, keep quiet about it. What happened if 1 million women were raped by Allied armies after achieving the victory? I think this needs to be brought into civic discourse. I don't know whether I'm being a little bit harsh, but let me draw Professor Pathak. He is here. So I would like actually Professor Pathak to give some comments.
I
Professor
must interrupt you just for a minute, and
Sure.
because I have to leave, but I
Okay.
need to mention that Adityanjee, partners in crime is fine, but the sad part is that this is the status of our international community. It's each country that very, very jealously guards its own sovereignty. These are 193 prima donnas in the United Nations. United Nations has got no force. International Court of Justice has got no force. International Criminal Court has no force. It is simply that each country is the one at the present time who is unwilling to do things that need to be done. ICC has got no force of its own. UN has got no force of its own. It's 193 countries together, each one making decisions, Security Council, each one having a veto of these 5 powers. And so the point simply is that we have to look at the system itself. So the problem is systemic. And as you rightly said, that Yazidis, as I mentioned, and conflicts, as I mentioned, point is that women's are suffering much more from sexual violence. Sexual atrocities are important. We've got to take care of them. But violence itself, where is intimate partner responsible for that? 30% in their lifetime, they are not going to have atrocities. Atrocities or Yazidis. Atrocities are in, as you have mentioned, in Syria, in Iraq, in some other places. And they are absolutely heinous. But I think the general problem of sexual violence is the one that we also need to pay a great deal of attention to that's not being done. My apologies. I have to leave.
Thank you, Professor Nanda. You are always welcome. Your comments are always very wise, erudite, and we always welcome you. So thanks a lot for
Thank
taking
you.
time.
And I'm sorry, Pathakji, I've got to listen to you separately because your wisdom is always important. So thank you.
Professor Pathak.
This is not my area of discussion or expertise, but what two things came to my mind is first thing is that in Sanskrit there is a very beautiful saying which says that Ashwam naiva gajam naiva vyagaram naiva cha naiva cha aja putro bali dadde devo durbala ghataka. The meaning is very simple. When there is a need for sacrifice, nobody sacrifices elephant or lion or horse for that matter. Whom they sacrifice is goat, because even the God does not help the weaklings. And unfortunately, the religious, people, you can call it as religious books, religious people, have always been discriminating right from the beginning, irrespective of which religion it is. Because, it took a pope after almost 1800 years to declare that women have soul. And finally, it was recognized that, okay, women do have soul. America took almost 200 years to get the voting rights to the women. So obviously, it is a struggle which is a high steep way for women to go up and fight for it. But you can see, and we have seen the significant discrimination happen when Hillary Clinton was contesting for the presidency. That reflected the mindset of the people. And that's why until this particular mindset is going to continue around the world, Aja Putro Bali, the death is going to happen. And that's why to prevent all these things, there has to be a need for reforming both Bible and Quran, which are absolutely a disgrace to the women folk around the world. They don't care. And that has to be reformed. And I don't know how it will happen, but it is going to be a challenge for the humanity at large to address these issues. And unless we address these issues, we cannot raise our head and say that we are human beings. That is what my 2 cents worth of saying.
Thank you, Professor Pathak, for your very explicit and very assertive comments. And they are very, very, timely, and they are very appropriate. So, we don't want to be, allied to the most fashionable ideology of the day. When we have to speak the truth, we have to speak the truth, and it may be hurtful, it may hurt some people, because truth does hurt. So that is the truth. Before opening for others, I would invite Mr. Clements, our Executive Director, to give his comments.
Hello, everyone. More than comments, I just wanted to play the devil's advocate as usual. In some societies, like for instance, in the UK, there was a lot of talk over the last few years that many British women born into liberal families live the liberal lifestyle. They turn around, they were kind of disgusted or disappointed with that lifestyle. They turn around, many of them converted to Islam, married Muslim men, they wear the full veil and they are having big families. So it seems like uh, all is not happy or when people go down that route as well. I was wondering, so with that background, we see that in America also. With that background, I wanted to understand what are the legal implications of having a uniform civil code, that these are the rights of women and this is what marriage is going to be and so forth, versus in a multicultural society of having separate civil codes for different sections. For instance, can should Mormons in the United States be allowed to be polygamous? Should bigamy laws apply to the whole uniformly, or should Mormons be allowed? And so Mormon women who don't want that, they can just declare themselves non-Mormon, or other women who might feel like they like that kind of a family lifestyle, they might opt in. Or similarly, in India, there's talk about uniform civil code. What are the implications of that? Is that a path that is worth going down with, or is it full of holes?
So you are raising a very interesting issues which are not necessarily related to each other. You're talking about abnormal psychology of certain individuals, which is an aberration rather than the normative behavior. But let's talk about the Mormon faith. There is a common civil code in this country. There's no doubt about it. Polygamy is not allowed, bigamy is not allowed. Mormon Church has renounced what they used to call plural marriages. The problem is the local society, because in state of Utah, where most of the Mormons are, based, and Mormon Church is strong, pretty much the local community does not prosecute it. So there's an attitude of wink, wink, nod, nod, let them do whatever they want. So they are basically running a parallel system and nobody wants to talk about it. But having said that, there is a quote unquote uniform civil code in this country. But, sometimes groups that deviate from the norm utilize the same rules and beat the rules. This is happening in a lot of Western democracies using a liberal democratic system of welfare. So again, polygamy is not allowed in this country. There's no religious exception, but in certain ways, not only just polygyny, but polyandry is also being practiced. There was a congresswoman who claimed that she had a legal husband and a cultural husband. Okay, figure it out. So it is very common to have a legal wife and then to have quote unquote girlfriends who will be supported by the state through the welfare system. And that is happening here because those so-called girlfriends are the cultural wives or the religious wives and not the legal wives. So people know how to beat a democratic liberal system. And if people are bent on beating that system, they will do that. You cannot have a universal, uniform civil code when we can't even enforce the legal laws in a single country. I think Professor Nanda has left, but he was saying that there are 193 prima donnas in the United Nations, and some of these international organizations do not have the force to enforce. But I'll go back to what Professor Pathak said, Devo Durvala Ghataka. So you can go to Bosnia and Herzegovina and you can arrest, Ratko Mladic and Radovan Karadzic for, war crimes, but you could not prosecute 1 million rapes, the perpetrators of 1 million rapes by the Allied forces in Europe, as Ripudaman was saying. Similarly, if the crimes happen in the Western world, you are not able to prosecute them. In Afghanistan and in Iraq, there were war crimes committed by occupying forces, Allied forces. We had all the evidence come out. Prisoners of wars were paraded naked and things like that. But nothing much happened about those cases. So again, victors write the history, victors administer the justice, and sometimes countries, point fingers at each other rather than do self-introspection. So that is where we lie. I do want to involve our, first fellow, Ankit. He has been waiting very patiently. So I want to, invite Ankit for his comments. He has studied the international laws and covenants, and he has made presentations in the past. So Ankit, what are your ideas? Stay confined to women's rights and sexual violence or sexual atrocities.
Just a few comments. In terms of this, I look at it as, the social practice which has evolved in several communities. And this has something to do with a lot of, religious verses which they practice. So besides the general crimes that we see, I look at it from this perspective. I mean, if you look at the geographical conditions of desert Arabia, where you don't have water, where you don't have plants, where you don't have manufacturing, you see that people are not going to give their daughters in that region for marriage purpose. And that's why you see that there's practice of polygamy and marriage with sisters and that kind of things. So I look at this from this perspective of, a religious sanction to some of these activities which are going on in some of the pockets world over. And besides that, when you look at crimes against women, when you look at those civilizations like the Indian civilization, where the languages have these internal controls inbuilt in them to see to it that there is a moral conduct and a control inbuilt in terms of behavior. Even in the languages that you see, Indian languages, unknown female would be called as sister, right? So, and then obviously we do have this celebration, nationwide celebration of the festival of Raksha Bandhan, where, unknown girls are going to tie you a rakhi and you take an oath of their security. This plants a kind of a subconscious thought in the community, and that is a kind of, a bottom-up dharmic control over people's behavior that is established in the continent as far as the Indian subcontinent is concerned.
Very well said, Ankit. So in Freudian terms, you are talking about national superego or cultural superego of a society. And yes, the Indian civilization had a very advanced superego, if I use Freudian terms. We don't have very many women in this, august audience. So Elder Elizabeth has already spoken. I would like to invite one of our female participants, Sharmila, who has been listening to it before.
Dr. Adityanjee, before we go to Sharmila ji, I think Yashwant ji just wanted to make a quick comment before you.
Okay.
Adityanjee, thank you very much. I just wanted to say hello to Elizabeth Araujo. As you know, she's my sister. And hi, Elizabeth, how are you? So nice to see her online and fantastic. Thank you, Elizabeth, for coming and joining this discussion.
Okay.
Sharmila ji.
Well, Elder Arujo is always welcome, but I do want to invite Sharmila from a woman's perspective about women's rights and sexual violence and sexual atrocities.
Thank you so much.
If you want, you can
Actually,
put your camera on as well.
Okay. I'll have to really put my face right in front of the phone because the speaker is not working here, but I just bear with me. Is that working now?
Okay,
Hello.
we can see. Hi.
Namaste.
Namaste.
So actually, I have a couple of points that I wanted to make. And this is from what I have heard on the internet, especially on Clubhouse, where you expect people to be, intellectually less challenged than the normal public on social media. So in India, there was a Supreme Court judge who was accused of sexual harassment of, a woman. And of course, we hardly have any case against him now. And then Supreme Court also goes back and produces data that 70% of cases of rapes are fake. So while we are looking at the fact that Supreme Court is saying that 70% of rape cases are fake, why aren't we looking at the rape culture which is prevalent in our judiciary? I'll not name anyone, but I have family members, 5 of them who are lawyers in the Supreme Court, in the High Court, and also in Punjab. And all of them are and one of them is a criminal lawyer, and he has great contacts. But when I was in problem, when I was working in an organization, a UK based company, none of them were able to support me legally. I mean, being from a Punjabi family, they said truck ke niche le aayenge hum unko, but that's the only support they could provide me. And other than that, they said, we cannot go ahead and fight a legal case. This whole system is corrupted, judiciary is corrupted. So these are their words, that sexual harassment and sexual favors is a part of that community. So that's first point. Secondly, you mentioned about UN. I'm not too sure how correct I am on this, but United Nations has investors like George Soros, and it's funny. I mean, United Nations does have a maker checker process. So if the UN members are funded by the body is funded by a certain investor, and the checker is also run by the same investor, is it really a maker checker process? I mean, if there was more time, I could have given more details about this. But that's my, other that we need. In fact, United Nations is not like all of you mentioned. Maybe we don't need it. Maybe there's a new, body of United Nations that needs to be, looked at here. And you mentioned about the Mormons, issue. Um, I wanted to make a comment on that, but that was new to me, so I completely missed on that, forgotten about that point. But yeah, probably sometime later we can talk about it. And reforming Quran. I mean, there are links on the internet where, Quran has, I don't know. I mean, if you make, if you have a book that clearly says to its followers that, women who are not Muslim are supposed to be captured, made sex slaves, and they are prostitutes. And even if prostitute is a respectable profession and a human being at the end of the day, but they don't see it like that. Should that be allowed? Should that be allowed? Even, you know? So I'm not too sure how we're going to deal with these issues, but I think there's a lot more.
I think it's
That's
important that
all I have.
thanks a lot for raising the issues. It's important to raise the issues because if you don't raise the issues, we don't discuss, there's no discourse, there's no, attempts for resolution. Uh, I would say that if you look at the history, because your comment about UN, there was League of Nations after World War One, and League of Nations as an international organization lasted less than a decade, became dysfunctional and defunct. And what we are seeing is the natural aging process of United Nations. It has outlived its utility, and probably it is going to die a slow death because it's not able to do things it was supposed to be doing. And that is why there's a general dissatisfaction with the processes of UN and how this, again, system has been abused, usurped by a certain coterie of countries, not coterie of people, but by coterie of countries. What happens within a national system is left to that nation. We don't want to make comments about a particular nation because each nation has to look at its own society, its own laws, and make the laws, reform. Before I say anything further, in this audience, there's a Supreme Court advocate from India, and I would like him to give some comments on international laws. So Vivek, do you want to say something about, speak from an international perspective, not from an Indian perspective?
So from the international perspective, I can say that this kind of the irony is coming not from now, but from the from the date the United Nations is informed. The cases of the war crimes, the cases of the international kidnapping, and even the citizens who used to travel as expatriates from one country to another, the lot of uh, cases we can see where the women are sexually abused by the local administrators. And even there's a one case I've seen in India that one of the ambassador, he was not an ambassador, he was a person who working in the High Commission of the Oman, and he raped a one Indian girl. Somehow Indian administrators have got wake up after a long time, means after the 6 or 7 days, and that person left the country, and Indian administrators never called for that. What the deal they have made, it was maybe some kind of uh, uh, means we can say that some kind of the negotiations they have done for the exchange of the prisoners, because uh, Oman government doesn't want to make such a issue. So this kind of the cases we have seen. Even if we go any kind of survey we do, more than 50% of the male administrators, the male uh, the person who is sitting at the topmost position, are involved in the sexual abuse in the last 50, because somewhere means you can ask to the local citizens, the person who was working along with them, the people who are working as a uh, means as a gardener, the drivers, all they used to say that more than 50% of the administrators were involved in the sexual abuse with their wives, with the women around them.
and not talking about only of the Kilton or the Nehru, more than 50% of them. So how we can expect that they can make such a rule, or they can make such a kind of the govern policies that they should come up with, that to give the equal right to the woman. So from the international perspective, what I can say that the woman should come forward. The woman should ask to the government to send them as a high commission, and the ambassadors in the UNO, and they should come up with such policies that the women who are in the jail, in the international jail, they should not be sexually abused, they should not be beaten up. So then only we can, as we can say in the Rome Statute also, some rules are there, but how many uh, government are following that? So
So
I think so that
thanks a lot,
from the
Vivek.
international perspective,
You brought multiple issues here. One is the misuse of diplomatic privilege. That tends to happen, misuse of diplomatic privilege by, diplomats in a third country, and then taking the route of diplomatic immunity to escape, criminal charges. That happens very often. The second thing you mentioned, and even Shamila mentioned, was the use of power. Pretty much use of power as an instrument of sexual harassment is seen in almost every society. Professor Nanda mentioned about sexual violence. Whether that use of power is in marriage, domestic power partnership, or at workplace, I think these are the issues we are getting sensitized. And pretty much in every country, this is being brought, and that is what I said, that if we have a problem, we need to talk about it, because if we don't talk about it, the problem remains. And the third thing is that the culpability of international organizations, because some, not just the United Nations agencies, but some of the international NGOs are complicit of the same. Some of these NGOs that have been working in Africa, that have been working in, sort of natural disasters, they have demanded sex in return for help for the people they were sent to provide help. And this is very commonly documented. You can see some of these international agencies, they had to, at some point in time, pull out some people. So any organization which is hierarchical is subject to abuse and corruption. And corruption does not mean just taking money. It means also abusing your power to extract favors. Sexual harassment becomes part of it. So we have global problems. This seminar was specifically on women's rights and sexual atrocities. Other issues that have come up in this seminar, we might put them for separate seminars from women's rights perspective. So, they can be a single seminar on sexual harassment at workplace. I mean, that's a topic by itself. Sexual violence in domestic relationships, which Professor Nanda was talking about, that could be topic of a separate seminar in the series, and we are open to organizing. If some of our participants want to participate, that is very well and good. We will, encourage you to participate in future seminars. We hold these seminars every Friday evening in United States, 9 p.m. to 10:30 a.m. To 10:30 p.m. That is India time, 6:30 a.m. for 1.5 hours. So you are more than welcome. You go to our website and you will have our Ved Nanda Fellowship Training Program. All the information, the list of some of the seminars is there. YouTube recording of some of the previous seminars is there. And I'm very glad to see Elder Elizabeth Arujo, who dropped in today's seminar, and we hope that she will continue to grace us with her presence in future seminars. We are running out of time, so I'm going to close this seminar, but I think within 24 hours, video recording of this seminar will be available. So if you want to look at it in detail, please do so. Next week's seminar would be presented by Ankit Shah. And Ankit, who is going to be your preceptor? Ankit, you are on the mute. All right, so
I'll check about it.
okay.
Yeah, next week's seminar is with Ankit and with Professor Lavanya Vemsani, and the topic is Western and Imperial Biases in the Human Rights Movement.
Very nice. So let's call it a day. Thank you, everyone. Namaskar. Good evening. And again, my thanks to both the fellows, all the faculty preceptors, and people from the audience who joined for this seminar. We appreciate your input and we hope that you will continue to join us for these seminars. Namaste.